All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the QT2 Systems webinar, 5 Mistakes All Swimmers Need to Avoid with Coach Vinny Johnson. Vinny is a former collegiate swimmer, retired triathlete, retired professional triathlete. He is a longtime coach with QT2 Systems and a resident swim expert. And he is going old school today with a whiteboard. Welcome, Vinny.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, for some of you that don't know who I am, my other job is a school teacher. I teach science, biology, anatomy, physiology. So this is my bread and butter in front of a whiteboard with some expo markers just to do visuals. So it's definitely the things I want to kind of go over and kind of show. Just it's helpful just to kind of diagram out to really make a point, because so much of the issues that we run into with swimming is the fact that we are trying to understand kind of where we are in a water environment. So it's kind of difficult in that sense. So I want to go over basically kind of the 5 biggest mistakes that I constantly see. And I've really kind of come full circle on a lot of things that have come across the spectrum of things that people should be working on. And kind of my aha moment a lot of times was sitting in the pool watching young kids swim in their practice before I got in or before I gave a lesson. And I would just kind of watch these little 6, 7-year-old kids just go back and forth in the pool. And having that visual that they were going to be faster than sometimes the people I was about to kind of give a lesson to in terms of a triathlete. These kids were up and coming swimmers, and I was about to give a lesson to somebody that had just gotten into swimming because they wanted to do a triathlon. So they never really had kind of swam before. So they don't have that historical athletic background of being in the pool. And there's a lot of hurdles that you have to overcome because of that. And what I notice about these kids is they just go back and forth and just kind of their arms kind of were flailing. And they were doing really well. They were moving through the water. They were planing through the water. And it just kind of struck me. And a couple of years ago, I did a webinar titled Arms Are Overrated, with the whole idea of that there's so much focus on the arm and there's just not enough focus necessarily on other aspects of your form that are easier to fix. The arm motion of a swimmer is almost impossible to replicate as kind of a person has doing a triathlon that has never swam before competitively as a young child. The flexibility in the shoulder, specifically in and around the scapula, is very unique to a swimmer. And to kind of replicate that is just really, really hard. So you have to overcome the fact that you don't have a flexible scapula to do certain arm motions. You know, for years and years and years, this whole idea of early vertical form, where your arm should be kind of like this in the water. It's almost impossible to do if you are just coming into triathlon or swimming as a triathlete kind of later on in life. And so as a result, you have to overcome it by doing other things. So this kind of gets me into what I always notice about little kids going back and forth in the pool is their head position is spot on. And so I just feel like that's the most important aspect of everything. Okay, so that's going to be kind of number one. And a lot of these actually feed into the head position in the water. So I'll tie those pieces together. But basically, the biggest 5 mistakes that I constantly see is the head position, ultimately balance. And I'll kind of talk about that because that is tricky. Hand entry, okay, the way the hand goes in, but more its placement in the water with respect to the rest of the body. So that is one huge mistake that I see. Squareness is a word I kind of just made up, I guess. It's people stay square to the water, okay, shoulders forward as they go through the water, as opposed to going side to side. So they keep their shoulders square and their hips rotate. So their hips and their shoulders don't rotate on the same kind of axis or connected. So I tend to see people just plowing through the water, and I just call it squareness. And then the last thing is just a kick, and it's just something that we just don't pay enough attention to, but it's super important to kind of have everything else fit. So I'm going to start with head position, and just going to put 2 swimmers on the board, some water, and I'll just kind of take swimmer, A and B. So the biggest issue that I always see is head position in the water. This particular swimmer is probably 2% of triathletes out there. This swimmer right here is probably a majority of triathletes out there. And as a result, we have a lot of issues that kind of arise from this. We first have to just stop and think, why is this happening? And ultimately, it gets into some of our comfort level in a water environment. So we have the ability to breathe. Oxygen is here, no oxygen here. Your first inclination, if you're not comfortable in the water, is to keep your connection to the oxygen always, always, always available, okay, which means your head is out of the water. Our mouth obviously is super important for that process, so we're always trying to keep our mouth away from the water. So as a result, our head is going to be up. But what this does is it drops the whole body, and we call it the vessel. The whole vessel tends to be angled and downwards towards the bottom of the pool. So as we move through the water, we're basically creating a lot of resistance just by trying to breathe. And we make it harder for ourselves. So we think we're kind of, working less, or at least safe. We're safer because our face is out of the water and we're able to swim more. But in actuality, you're actually working harder and harder and harder, making it harder and harder and harder for you to breathe. And it just kind of compounds on itself. Our first tendency is that in order to keep our head out of the water, we basically make our arm kind of go straight out with our elbow, the inside of our elbow straight up. And this provides kind of that safety net to kind of keep our head out of the water. So we basically, as we enter, we push forward, elbow up, and we're able to kind of feel safe. Because, and this will tie into number 2, it's about balance. Whenever we're on land and we lose balance, we tend to push down on a surface to obviously protect us from falling over. We do the same thing in the water. When we go to our side, we lose balance because less of our body form is basically pushing down on the water. So when you go to your side, less of your body is pushing down. So you tend to drop in the water. So as a result, you're going to press down. So that's another key thing to kind of realize is as you kind of push down on the water, your head's going to go up. Okay, so we're going to push down on water here. Head's going to go up, feet go down. Okay, so this just sets up a really bad planing in the water. When we go over here, kind of look at a swimmer that is very efficient through the water, they really don't have to breathe much because they're actually piercing through the water. And that's because their head is extremely low. I like to always tell people as you take a breath, you should have one eye in the water and the other eye out of the water. If both of your eyes are coming out of the water, you're not piercing through the water. As 2 eyes come out of the water is going to hit the side of your head as opposed to the crown of your head. So as a result, you're going to get a lot of frontal resistance having those 2 eyes out of the water. Another kind of quick little thing to kind of think about too when you breathe, as you go take a breath, if you open your mouth like a ghost, okay, that's a no-no. You always want to breathe like Popeye. So as you go take a breath, you want to breathe to the side of your mouth because when your head pierces the water, it's going to make a bow wave. And so the water will go down underneath your face, but only if you pierce the water. If you're not piercing the water's just going to basically flood over your mouth. So as a result, you're going to raise your head higher and open up and try to grab more water as you breathe, as opposed to pierce the water goes down and you kind of just breathe to the side of that bow wave. That bow wave just comes right under kind of the side of the lip. So it is scary sometimes because the water is so close to where you're trying to get oxygen. But once you make a nice bow wave, it's always there for you. And that's just kind of important. And one eye under the water will usually do that trick. The other thing that we need to kind of look at is that the arm entry tends to be more at an angle. So as the arm basically enters into the water, the kind of pressure tends to be a little less vertical down as opposed to the swimmer. So you get a little kind of we always want these arrows going in this direction, okay? We're trying to go this way, so we need to push water that way. Ultimately, if I were to kind of draw the arm of an elite Olympic swimmer, it would basically be almost like that, okay? Arm over a barrel is always what you want. You want to kind of up and over. But again, I kind of talk about the issues that we run into with scapular flexibility, just not being able to do that. But if you were to watch an Olympic swimmer, basically the vector line is going directly backwards from where they're coming from, and that's going to propel them forward, and that's why they're in the Olympics and we're not. And that's usually just due to that flexibility. Okay, so that is kind of what we're going for in head position, always down in the water, kind of one eye out of the water, one eye under the water, and then just a little side breathe right there, as opposed to kind of both eyes out of water and breathing like a ghost. That just sets up a lot of extra work that you don't need to do, and it really just makes swimming not very fun. So the next thing that kind of basically fits into this is this whole idea of balance. And balance is super easy on land, but it's super hard in the water because there's not something to grab onto. It's liquid. Ultimately, the most kind of, if you were to really kind of break swimming down, it's, all right, I want you to jump in the water and you are going to take something relatively solid about the size of your hand, and you need to grab a liquid and you need to force that liquid in a particular direction to push the rest of your body forward. And it just sounds kind of insane almost to think of, and it's amazing that we can actually do it. But a lot of it is just all the hydrodynamics of, doing things the right way. And balance tends to be a super important piece to this. So if we just take kind of the human form here and we take away the legs, we'll take away kind of the head, and we'll kind of do that little, take away the arms, leave the chest there, and we're just kind of left with this letter T. And letter T represents your balance. Your balance is basically from one shoulder to the other shoulder, over to your sternum, all the way down to your naughty bits. So that represents your T, and that is where all your balance is. And when I talk about balance, I talk about when you lose it, you have to activate the T. When you lose balance is when you go to take a breath. When we are swimming forward, okay, shoulders forward, our chest is facing the floor, our stomach is facing the floor, you have balance. Once you go take a breath, now all of a sudden, your side of your body is facing the bottom of the pool and you drop, because less of you is basically presenting itself to the water, and so you kind of drop in the water. This, what most people do is they reach out and push down. What you need to do is really tighten up and put pressure on the most buoyant aspect of your form, which is your chest. Okay, so this is kind of the biggest buoyant piece of you, which is from one shoulder to the other, all the way down, kind of your respiratory organs, your digestive organs. All that is kind of like your life preserver. It's kind of full of air and open space. And if you actually tighten it up and engage it, you will rise in the water and you won't drop. A lot of times when I'm doing yoga, it's the same idea. When you start to lose balance in a certain position, you're always taught to kind of really tighten up your navel, bring it towards your backbone, tighten up your core. And it's the same idea in swimming. If you start to engage your core, and think about your belly button, tighten it up, bringing it to your spine, and then kind of putting a little bit of a lean into kind of the life preserver of you, which is kind of your lungs. All of a sudden you find balance. And that just really, really kind of increases your ability to feel comfortable on your side. The slowest position in swimming is being square. And if you keep on going square, you go slow. If you try to pierce through the water, through kind of not being square, so kind of piercing through, Like if you imagine you need to kind of break down, a door, what are you going to do? You're going to kind of bring your shoulder in, go into the door. You're not going to go kind of full frontal into the door. We just know that the amount of resistance that we can pierce through is pretty much nothing. So instead you need to pierce through it, and that's always with the shoulder. So we're constantly trying to get from side to side to side as quick as possible, not staying necessarily kind of square to the water. I'll get back to that when I kind of cover that a little bit more. But that whole idea of T, it's just super important to always pay attention to, just because that is kind of where you can find kind of safety in that aquatic environment when you kind of go to the side. The next thing I just want to kind of cover is hand entry. And so we'll just kind of take a top view of a swimmer here. And so we have basically, the shoulder, the upper arm, and then we have kind of the hand entry. And what we're trying to do is not make the lower body snake in either direction. And the only way to do that is if you imagine your middle finger always needs to enter in front of your shoulder. So if you start to stay kind of too close to your head in terms of an entry point, so if we kind of take this and we start to kind of swing this over in this direction, now all of a sudden your feet are going to go in the opposite direction. Same thing with the other arm. If it kind of swings that way, then the legs are going to swing that way. Okay, so for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And if you start to kind of bring the upper body over, the lower body is going to need to compensate. So you're going to start to snake through the water. We call it crossing over. You'll hear that a lot. And that's just an awareness of where your actual arm is kind of entering into the water. The other thing is being too wide, which I don't see too much. The only time I really see people wide is if they're really shoulder driven swimmers, and their arms are relatively straight on recovery. Okay, so if they're kind of staying square and their arms are straight on recovery, they're going to basically enter super wide. And it does the same kind of thing, but instead of being kind of snake, you tend to kind of see more. Make a C shape as opposed to an S shape. So you tend to cause that issue to happen. And again, we want to be as straight as possible through the water. There's a lot of resistance all around us, and it's important to kind of make sure that we're not necessarily weaving through the water. The other thing I want to talk about hand entry is what happens when it does enter into the water, and the things that we need to kind of think about in terms of that entry. I always like to kind of bring up the point of just, tools that we can have by ourselves in the pool. It's very rare that we're able to get eyes on us swimming. And so sometimes we have to really concentrate on our form and what we're doing and having visuals around. So the best thing is always kind of the walls. Okay, so that kind of corner of, if you're swimming towards a wall and this is the floor of the pool, that corner is always kind of a good idea as to where your arm should enter into the water. Okay, as it enters in, kind of where it should point to before you start to catch, pull, and push through the actual stroke. So if we have kind of a swimmer and we have kind of a swimmer that is relatively efficient, as their arm kind of enters into the water, it's kind of entering down at an angle. Another piece to this puzzle is also the flexibility of the scapula. Okay, so we do again kind of run into an issue where the higher elbow recovery that you have is all based on how flexible your scapula is. And so the lower elbow kind of recovery is going to tend to present a flatter arm into the water. And there's a way to kind of make sure that you can overcome that. And that is sometimes the flexibility of the wrist. That tends to be a relatively flexible joint for most of us because we live on land and we tend to use it all the time. And so even though your arm might be relatively flat, you can kind of overcompensate for that inability of flexibility to kind of really get up and over and down in the shoulder, and you kind of use that wrist. The other piece to the kind of the entry of the arm is we try to sometimes go for that angle. We sometimes try to actually kind of present our arm in a less kind of straight fashion, but we forget our kind of anatomical structure. If we are square to the water, going to, through the water, and our arms are out in front of us, and I ask you to basically kind of rotate your humerus and your upper arm and try to get an angle like that, you can't kind of anatomically do it. If I ask you to kind of go to the side and do it, it's super, super easy. Okay. So if I'm to my side, my arm just can kind of drop. If I'm square and I'm trying to kind of get up and over, it's super hard to do. But again, if I am kind of have released that position, now all of a sudden I can kind of drop my arm. So sometimes we're looking for kind of a steep angle of entry, but we're square to the water and we're not going to achieve it. So it's kind of a tough conundrum to kind of overcome if you're not really paying attention, again, to being on your side. Everything in terms of grabbing water is easier on your side than it is if your shoulders are square. Another thing to always pay attention to is kind of that inside of that shoulder, elbow. And this is something you can always just look at when you're swimming. If you see kind of the inside of your elbow, it's really, really hard to engage a swim stroke and put a lot of pressure on the water. And it really kind of sets up a poor angle. So if I just go like that, you can just all of a sudden see kind of the difference in the angle of my arm. Okay, so instead of having the stop signal almost up, now all of a sudden I can kind of easily drop the angle of my forearm. So my forearm is above my wrist is above my hand above the fingers. And that's what we're always kind of going for. The thing about this also is sometimes when I give a lesson, the person will jump into the water and I'll tell them to get out of the water. And what they do is they basically place their hands onto the deck. They push on the deck and they push themselves up and out of the water. That is a perfect swim stroke. So this person that came to actually get a lesson on how to actually swim knows how to actually interact with the environment in all the right spots and all the right placements. But the hard part is obviously transitioning that into water. So when we think about that, and it's just always kind of neat to sometimes think about, is when we're at our desk working and we go to push ourselves up, we always do an amazing swim stroke. We basically take our hands, we put it in front of our shoulders, we push down, okay? We can't see the inside of our elbow, and we start to engage and we push whatever structure we are trying to get up and out. If I tell you to do that with your elbows pointing up, okay, so you have to keep your elbows up, palms down, place it down on your desk and try to push yourself up and out of the water. Can't do it. Okay. Now all of a sudden you do this, whoop, pop right up. Okay. So just that change in angle, all of a sudden you're now able to engage everything else in your upper body and put pressure on what you're trying to get away from. And that's kind of an aha moment sometimes. We actually do everything right. It's just sometimes thinking about it in a different way. Same idea when we have hand entry. If I were to tell you to place your hands kind of right in front of your face and push yourself out of the water, it's a little harder to do. If I were to tell you to put your hand super, super wide, put it on deck, push yourself out of the water, it's a little harder to do. And we all know, well, I just need to put my hands in front of my shoulder and it's going to be easier. Okay. So it's harder to put pressure on a form when it's in front of your face, harder when it's super far away from your face. So much easier when your hands are right in front of your shoulder. So that's just something that you can kind of do some push-ups out of the water. I mean, we used to do it all the time in practice. It's just one of those great exercises just to kind of do. Doesn't take any tools or tricks, anything. It's just kind of really thinking about that stroke. So getting back to the diagram, again, that entry really just comes down to that inside of that elbow. If you're able to kind of drop it, you're going to get a nice kind of 20-degree angle into the water. We never want to reach straight out. It just brings up so many issues just because of what I just kind of pointed out. If I were to ask you to get yourself up and out with locked elbows, elbow facing forward, you can just feel the difference in the lack of strength to actually make that motion. So that's kind of one of the big things that you always want to kind of pay attention to. And again, if you are super inflexible, as your arm enters, just really kind of use that wrist. When you snap that wrist down, everything else tends to go kind of up and over what we call barrel. That was always kind of used when we were swimming as you enter, try to get it up and over. And that's when you engage with the water and you can kind of push it forward. And that can be initiated with the wrist. I think Finish makes agility paddles. Those are probably the better paddles I've seen because it's actually curved on the inside. Sometimes paddles are super flat, and so that just tends to keep our hand flat. The agility paddle, it's curved on the bottom, so as you enter into the water, it already starting to kind of curve your hand up and over the water, which is super helpful to have a tool to kind of do that. So the next thing is just being square to the water. So if we were just to take a front view of two swimmers and we kind of make their shoulders. Okay, so we have kind of shoulders here, shoulders here. That person never moves their shoulder much left to right. Then we take another swimmer and their shoulders are pretty much kind of, up and down, up and down. And we have water. This person's frontal surface area is super high for the water. This person just has kind of a little top of their shoulder piercing through the actual water. The other shoulder is out of the water. So we've already decreased a lot of frontal surface area just by kind of getting on our side. So this whole squareness thing also leads way back to kind of the first thing I brought up, which is how we feel safe in the water. This is the safest feeling kind of form that you can have in the water because you're relatively buoyant. You have, again, a lot of surface area that's exposed to the water, kind of holding you up, and it feels safe. And so as we swim, we keep that kind of binky, and we turn our head to breathe, and then we turn our hips to rotate. We all know we're supposed to rotate. And so as a result, we do that. And that just breaks up the connection between all the major strong muscles of the body. If we could really tie into our large muscles of our chest, our back, especially our core, and have them all work as one piece when we do engage with the water, you get a lot more propulsion. Once you make a disconnect between shoulder rotation and hip rotation, now all of a sudden you're just swimming either kind of with your arms, if you're a shoulder-driven swimmer, or with a hip-driven swimmer, you tend to just drive more get more propulsion through kicking in your hips and just that kind of rotation of your core. And so again, you lose that whole dynamic. And that again ties back to the T. Your shoulder with the T going down your sternum all the way to your belly button ties into your hips. And so your hip and your shoulder should rotate at the same time. And that just encourages a lot more muscle engagement and timing and rhythm that just really kind of propels yourself forward. There are times in triathlon where a shoulder-driven stroke is actually more efficient. And this usually occurs when there's chop. So when there's chop in the water, it tends to be advantageous to speed up cadence, shorten the stroke, because if you have any sort of delay in the stroke, it's called kind of the glide of the stroke, where you enter, you kind of reach, and you're gliding in the water, and you're trying to grab the water. That's super efficient and great when the water is relatively calm, but sometimes you really run into a lot of turbulence in the water. And that's the only time where you would want to transition to kind of that shoulder-driven, higher cadence. Really think about the front of your stroke and turning over the front of your stroke, because once you kind of start to push the water behind you and glide, there's just too much resistance to make it relatively efficient. And that's kind of rare it depends. I'm talking more resistance from kind of weather and water conditions as opposed to you're in a crowd. Usually when you're in a crowd of swimmers, the water is moving in the direction that you want to go with, because there's a bunch of you going in that direction. So you tend to be able to kind of draft. The type of condition I'm talking about is just that choppiness of kind of open water, where you need to kind of get rapid fire strokes in, and that's when kind of that shoulder piece, shoulder rotate driven swimming really kind of comes into play, and it's a relatively useful tool to have in the tool belt, if you ever need to kind of take advantage of that. Okay, so we always want to, again, just make sure our hips and our shoulder are tied together, and that is just going to allow huge muscles to really interact and help you propel through the water. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the kick. And the kick for triathletes tends to be kind of low on the scale of importance, usually because our legs are fried, especially on Mondays after kind of a long weekend. And so if we kind of go back to our swimmer, we have the upper body, and then kind of the lower body, and then the feet. I'll kind of make kind of I won't really go there. And so if we imagine that this is kind of the midsection, and let's just make a knee here, that's a thigh. Make the thigh go down. Boom. So if this is kind of the midsection, this is the thigh, that's the knee, that's the foot. We tend to, most of the time, try to kick with our knees. And what we want to do is try to get away from that. What I always like to kind of talk to people about, usually after seeing them swim, is I don't see their butt cheeks kind of coming out of the water. Usually they're sinking in the water. And again, that might be tied to what's happening in the front end of the stroke, heads up, pushing down on the water. So the butt cheeks kind of are dropping underneath. You kind of want to feel a slight breeze on those cheeks. And if you kind of feel that, you are relatively good in terms of position, in terms of playing in the water. The other thing that might be dropping the hips in the water and the butt cheeks is the fact that you're kicking with your knees. Your kick is knee driven. And this tends to be a common feature of when people kick. What I'd like to try to have you do is really focus, instead of kicking down, kicking up with the glutes. When you kick up, eventually you're going to have to kick down. Okay, so usually when your kick is higher in the water and you go to kick down, because you kind of have to, your kick is going to go a little deeper in the water. So you're going to get a better kick, as opposed to kind of a really weak kick with just the muscles of your calf. What I'm trying to do is really engage you with using the huge muscles of your thighs and your glutes in the kick. The knee should bend because of the kick coming from the hip joint. So the knee is just kind of a whiplash motion of all the force that you're exerting with your hip. And so your knee is just an extension of that torque that you're putting on the form. I usually does it. And if we kind of reverse what we're concentrating on, we tend to always concentrate on kicking down on the water. And if we kind of reverse that, it all of a sudden makes the kick more efficient by thinking about, all right, I'm going to really concentrate on kicking up. And all of a sudden we engage the hip. It's almost like in running, we sometimes tend to pay too much attention to our stride out in front of us, where most of the stride is behind us. The front of your stride is really just an extension of what happened behind you. So if you want to lengthen your stride, a lot of us start to kind of reach with our front leg to kind of make more length, as opposed to just flip it and just try to make the back end of your stride longer, and then your front end stride gets longer, just like that. And it's the same idea with a kick. If you concentrate on kicking up, all of a sudden the whole kick kind of comes into play in terms of being more efficient. one of the biggest issues that I see with people coming into swimming from other sports, especially things where things like hockey and skiing, where you had these boots, these structures that kept the foot relatively dorsiflexed, is the ability to actually kick plantar flex. Okay, so a lot of times our foot's like this all the time. That's dorsiflexion. Plantar flexion is when we're able to point our toes. So the kick, and swimmers are notorious for having flexible ankles, and they can point their toes when they kick, and that's huge. And obviously, if you're a swimmer and you go into skiing and hockey, I try to skate, and my ankles can't do it. I go trail running all the time, and my ankles are just constantly popping and rolling all the time, because I don't have the strength, but it's advantageous in the water. The only way to really kind of overcome this is using fins. It's the ability to kind of take a fin, put it on your foot, makes your foot bigger and longer. And as you use the fin, it just has more ability to put leverage on your ankle to make it more flexible. So that's just something that I never shy away from with people that are using to use fins. It's just, especially when you're trying to overcome a lot of your ability to feel safe in the water and do some of these things, a fin just helps that. And it just makes you more aware of and being able to pay attention to things that you really want to work on. So those were the big five. Head position, basically pushing down on the water, just that whole idea of a need for breath. And then we obviously have balance, the entry of the hand, staying square, and the kick. I just wanted to go over just 3 quick drills that are just really easy fixes for this. Not necessarily fixes, but will put you in a position to be able to concentrate on some of these things. And one of them is just kicking on your side. So, and always with fins. When you kick on your side with fins, you're able to really pay attention to all your positions. Okay. So as you're kicking on your side, you're able to look forward, and you can kind of look at what your elbow is doing. Okay. So you can kind of turn it down. You can look at what your hand is doing while you're kicking, and you can kind of make adjustments. Okay. So when I see people kick on their side, this is the position I want to see their arms. Okay. But a lot of us are kind of out like this. Okay. But if we look, all of a sudden, all right, let me get my angles down. Always want to feel kind of water hitting the back of your hand. That means that your hand is relatively down in the water. It's kind of more efficient that way. You're able to work on that breath and really putting your head in the right position to kind of pierce through water, thinking about how you're breathing. And that's just super important. It just calms everything down, slows everything down. Kick on your side. If you are going back and forth in the lane, hitting people, getting kicked out, just being a nuisance in the lane, it's most likely because your arm is not straight out in front of your shoulder. Okay, so it might be too much to your chest or too far back. So this is kind of your rudder. So just know as you kick on your side and you start going in all directions, you need to kind of concentrate on the position of your rudder, and that's going to get you kind of in a straight line. And it's important to look forward to see where you're going and see what your body position is doing in terms of the direction that you're going. So some people just say, all right, I got to kick on my back and go forward, and they just don't pay attention to where they're going. And that's when they're kind of all over the place. But it's super important to always look ahead, and that's when you can kind of make all your adjustments. The other thing is, before you do anything in terms of a drill, you always want to make sure you're in proper posture. We are constantly in an environment where we're kind of slunched over a computer, banging away at keys, looking at our cell phones. And so our posture tends to be relatively poor. And in swimming, that just sets up really, really bad technique. And so it's always kind of important just to think about when you're about to push off the wall to do a set or to do a drill, just to really try to get yourself in military posture, pin your shoulder blades back, get your chest out, And that just really kind of engages a nice kind of piercing form through the body, as opposed to this hunchback kind of person on a computer trying to go through the water. It just sets up kind of a nice kind of thing to think about. And it just really helps to improve everything, especially with that 616. If you're going side to side in the lane, it's probably because you're also possibly hunched over. So I call it 616 is the next drill that ties in with kicking on your side, because you kick on your side and it's super important to also learn how to get to the other side. Okay, so 616 means that you kick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, switch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, switch. Okay, so it's 6 kicks, 1 stroke, 6 kicks, 1 stroke, just over and over and over and over again. And that gets you used to that rotation. You can really think about your shoulders and your hip moving as one piece as you do that rotation. And you only have to worry about one rotation. And you will get really quick feedback if you're rotating well or not. And you also, as you go to rotate, you'll feel that imbalance where you're about to drop in the water. So you're trying to get to the side as quick as possible. And then you can kind of work on that T and just really finding buoyancy in your core. The other thing is just an old school fingertip drag. So as you recover, you're just dragging your fingertips on the surface, which is kind of one of the most basic drills out there, but sometimes we just forget to do it. And that's just really great for just trying to improve that scapular flexibility. But at the same point, it always allows you to kind of enter into the water with a little higher elbow than kind of normal. So as you recover, you're just dragging your fingertips on the surface of the water before you enter the water. The other thing that can give you really great feedback when you're by yourself in the pool is putting a buoy between your knees or between your ankles. So a lot of times we just take the buoy, we put it between kind of our groin or thighs, way up in that area, and we just swim. And little do we know, our feet are just going side to side, 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 because our upper body is disconnected. We're crossing over everything, and it's just causing your legs to go side to side. So a great way to figure out is, are my legs kind of in line with my glutes? And that's the thing. You always kind of want to hide your feet, hide your legs behind your butt. They shouldn't be coming out of that line, is to see if they're actually doing that. And if you don't have a coach watching you, you just take a buoy, put it between your knees, start swimming, and right away you'll know kind of what's happening. If you go down to the ankle, put your buoy between your ankles, squeeze it, start swimming. That's even more kind of feedback as to how much you possibly are snaking your lower body. And then you really just start to concentrate on your core, your belly button, and you start to kind of tighten that up. You tighten that up with the rotation of the shoulder. Now all of a sudden your hip and your shoulder are moving at the same time, and you can start to feel that wiggle dissipate. You're always going to have some side-to-side motion, but it's just a great way to get kind of that instant feedback. Okay, so kicking on your side, 616 is a great drill. Just kind of nail home that feeling, fingertip drag, and then just use that buoy in different parts of your leg to kind of get different feedback.
All right, Vinny, thank you so much. Before I forget to mention, if anyone does want Vinny to take a look at his stroke, he does offer a swim analysis. So that's something that you can purchase and have him look at some videos of you. And now I'd like to turn to some questions. We have a couple that are in the chat room. So I'll start by going through those. If you do want to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat box or feel free to come off of mute. But I'm gonna do the first one, which is, do you have a point of view about a 2-beat kick versus a 6-beat kick or a 4-beat kick?
Whatever works. I mean, it's the same thing. You watch the Olympics and you'll see them all. Obviously, there are certain distances that require an extreme kick, and we're just not in that sport in terms of triathlon. But when you look at distance swimming, you'll see them all. And sometimes it's a fingerprint where somebody just has their sequence of ability and neuromuscular firing, and how they kind of keep their balance. personally, I always had a 2B kick, and it was just something I'm still working on today to try to kind of kick better. But it's just one of these things that it's my form. It's just like a pitcher has different arm slots when they throw the ball. It's just what they're able to do with the environment because of the way they're kind of built. But it, it it's really just what makes you feel comfortable in the water, and that's ultimately the big thing. I always like for people to work on faster beats, just because I think it does a lot for everything. But when it comes down to race day, it's just what kind of feels comfortable.
All right, and the second question is if you have a point of view on the strongest part of the catch, at the beginning or at the end?
So I think of the catch because I think of you catch the water, you kind of start to get yourself engaged with the water, which is basically right at kind of the armpit. That's where you have that, I'll call it the magic stroke. That's where the magic happens. Same thing when I tell somebody to get out of the water. It's not really what they do kind of up out of the water. It's once they have their hands on the deck and they get themselves out of water, that's where it all happens. So I think some people might call it at the end. If the person is, I would say it at the end. Okay. So how you present in the front sets you up for when your hand is underneath your armpit. But that's where the magic happens, is when your hand is underneath the armpit, where is everything in terms of the angles of your hand and all that kind of stuff? Because kind of what happens out in front isn't necessarily super important as long as everything is ready to roll when it's time to roll. And when your hands are right where your armpits are, it's go time. And when you do that, you want to try to, and I see this a lot too, that could have been the sixth mistake, is to shorten the stroke on the back end. Too many people give up on the stroke too early. So I always like to tell people, all right, you got the water right here, finish it past your pockets. So your pockets of your pants, your hand needs to come out, and you need to blast your hand through the pockets of your pants. And too many people pull pull their hand out before you even get to the pants. It's coming out too late. And so the more you can kind of really force that water down towards the thigh, the more propulsion you're going to get. It's a karate chop. You have it and you're just pushing it all the way down. But a lot of times people just kind of give up on it, trying to think about the front end of your stroke. And the back end of your stroke is sometimes more important most of the time than the front end. So I guess in the catch, the back end, everything at the end, it matters.
All right, this question is related, which is what is the path of your hand and arm following the catch?
A straight line. I grew up for a long time. It was an S shape. So as you enter, you make kind of this S shape underneath you. That's how I was taught to swim. That has been kind of through everything that we've been doing with video and analysis, it doesn't exist anymore. You grab the water and you drive it straight back, because we want all vectors to go to the place we just left. So as we push off the wall, we want to get as far away from that wall as possible. And the quickest way to do that is to push towards that wall in a straight line. I always tell people, if you have a smiley face on your hand and you're swimming away from me, I should see that smiley face all the time. And so that means that your hand, the vector kind of arrow that's coming out of your hand, is always facing the spot that you're swimming away from. And that just sets up. And so if you make the S and all of a sudden your vectors are going in different directions. But yeah, if somebody kind of, I think in the 90s, it kind of, the S shape went away and now it's a straight line.
All right, so picking up on that, the next question is, what's the best way to get rid of the S? I was taught that way also, and now I can't get rid of it.
Trying to think how I got rid of it. Um, Stop. Do no kick swimming. So take your legs and tie them together, tie your ankles together. Actually, there's also a buoy, the Envoy buoy, which is they look like two water bottles, but relatively big water bottles. And you can have them empty, full of air, or you can open one, pour water into, or put it under the water, it fills up with water. So you can actually have two large water bottles as buoys that are filled with water, and put them into, use them as a pull buoy and swim. It's super. There's a lot of resistance to it, and so I would tend to think, or I would say, try to overcome it by quickening up the stroke. And by no kick swimming, you have to do that. You have to speed up your cadence just to maintain forward propulsion. And I think that's the best way to get rid of it, is just to get a more powerful stroke. If you grew up with an S shape, you probably have a glide in you too. That's what we were kind of taught to do, is kind of reach out and glide and make this beautiful S shape. And now all of a sudden it's just, just power through the water, get it in there, grab it, push it straight back, do it again, do it again, do it again. And so, there's no glide anymore. It's none of that. It's just getting after the water. I would tend to think, I'm trying to think of a couple paddles that would do the trick. The agility paddle might kind of get you there. There is a paddle that has like a rudder underneath it, and it tells you if your hands kind of going side to side a little. But I don't think you're gonna get the feedback that you're gonna get from no kick swimming, which is just get your ankles together, just go. Your lower body's gonna drop. In order for you not to drop, you just turn over the stroke. And also, don't feel like you have to do 25 yards. Sometimes just do half a length, just because it is kind of a powerful all-out effort. And sometimes when, as aerobic athletes, as triathletes, we tend to not to do very, very short things because we don't like it, because sometimes we have to wait around and it makes us go all out, which sometimes we don't like to do. And so just think about doing a half a lap, just all out, no kick. And that's a very violent way of getting quick turnover.
All right. Any other questions? If you want to throw them in the chat box, or feel free to come off mute if you want to ask Vinny directly. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you so much, Vinny, for taking the time today and sharing all your experience.
Thank you.
And
Anytime.
so this webinar has been recorded. It'll be up on YouTube by later tonight. So have a great night, everyone.
Good night, y'all.